that we've got. Brilliant. So, so hopefully one of the things is, if you may or may not have been on one of these webinars before, I almost say podcast because I'm often, when I'm doing a podcast or a webinar, I get the two mixed up. Can I just check that my team can hear me? Okay, I think, Halal, it's a problem at your end. So I believe, I'm not sure whether you want to leave and come back in, but my audio is working. So we're going to talk all about rethinking organisational change, and this is part of our organisational change series. And I guess we've done a number of rethinking webinars recently, and I'm trying to come at these things from a different angle. So if you are somebody who's familiar with the sort of podcasts or webinars that I run, you'll know that I've done lots of things on change. I actually wrote a book on change. So I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. Maybe look at some of the aspects of delivering change that we don't always think about, to give us a bit more of an interesting insight. All of the other things we've covered before are also highly relevant too. So first of all, the learning outcomes for this session, we're going to think differently about how we might lead change if we're a change agent. I'm going to touch on how we might build an effective change team, the change equation, if you come across it, and most importantly, lots of the focus is on how we can communicate differently to overcome resistance. I will come back to Kotter's 8-step change process, but I'm only going to touch on that really lightly because I've covered it in detail in lots of other webinars that I've done, and we will send links out to these things. So I can see that there are some names here that I'm less familiar with. Hopefully that's going to be okay. If this is just a starting point for you, you want to look at other things, then do feel free to follow the links. We'll drop them into the chat and we'll also send them out to you so you've got that extra information. If you haven't met me before, my name's Lucinda, and this is an opportunity for you to just say in the group chat where you come from in terms of organisation. What's your role, maybe where you are in the world. I know we often at this time of day get people from all over the place, which is great. And also, what's your interest in this topic? So do feel free just to use that chat there and to put those in place. My team, can I just check, have you got a big black square in the middle of your screen?
No, I can just see your slides.
Okay, I've got a random black square. That's fine. As long as no one else has, that doesn't matter. Okay, cool. So my background's many years in corporate learning and development. I've definitely always had a keen interest in change, and I wrote a book called The Change Superhero, which you can get easily on Audible or on Amazon. And it's a lot of what I'm talking about here is stuff that I researched for that book. It's meant to be a really practical, simple handout type book. And really the purpose of this is to give you some of the sort of slightly quirkier angles, because this is about rethinking change rather than just doing the traditional change. So lots of things that you would have come across, which in terms of change, hi Michelle, is you might have come across things like people talk about the change curve, which is people go through various emotions during change. Absolutely right. Kotter's change model, 8-step change model, I will touch on, but I'm not going to go into these more traditional things in lots of detail. I'm going to just try and come at it from a slightly different angle to give you some food for thought. So if this is new to you, do go back and look at these other resources, which will give you more detail. In terms of my other hat, when I'm not thinking about change management or learning and development, I'm also the CEO of Actus. So we have performance learning and talent management software. And of course, change management is key because often that's something where you are delivering change as an organisation. You may be trying to create culture change in terms of better people management. So you might use our software for something like that. Or you might want to evaluate senior leaders by using 360 feedback to see whether or not they have any behavioural change or gaps in their behaviours or your values that you would like to sort of create a culture change. So the tools that we use from a software point of view can be really relevant in terms of managing change. And we also have other resources on change. So we've got plenty of free resources that we're going to send you links to, absolutely loads of those. But also I run in-house change superhero training for cohorts of people. And we also have Actus Academy, which has e-learning. So you had a chance to be a little bit interactive. It's great. I'm going to have a little look up the comments to see who we've got here. Welcome, including the AI assistant, because that's a new one for me to work out. Even the AI assistant that someone's uploaded communicates and tells us who they are. And I'm going to pop a poll up. I wonder if the AI assistant will take part in the poll. So this is just to get us warmed up and see, if I was to ask you how you feel about change, what would your response be? So just a really simplistic poll. What's your usual response to change? Let's assume it's work change. Are you someone who loves it? You seek it out, never like to do things the same? Does it depend, or are you not a fan? And this will be interesting to see whether we are a representative group on here. Hi, Joel, technology consultant. So obviously you're having to help people with change totally. So are you in Wales at the moment? San Francisco and Aberystwyth. That is quite a variety of location. Welcome, Joel. I think this is the first time you've joined one of our webinars. Hi, Elaine. Great stuff. Thank you for coming again. We've got quite a few people from local councils and NHS. Makes sense. Well, hi, Claire. Great stuff. Okay. Real variety of people here. So how interesting here. Let me share this poll. Do we think we've got a representative group here or not? Well, maybe the clue was in the title of the webinar. So what we do have here, and let's see whether this ties through into some of the exercises I'm going to do around personality. So we undoubtedly have, well, a group of people who have interest in change, or it depends. So if you've put depends, is that because it depends on how you feel about it? Let us know a little bit more if you've put depends. But we certainly haven't got anyone who's saying, I'm not a fan. Now, in the average population, and actually when I've asked this more general webinars, I definitely would get some people who definitely say, I don't really love change. I really, really dislike it. And we probably all know people who are that way. So the reason actually I think that is so useful for us to have seen in the first place is we've got a group of people who are change oriented, basically. And what can that mean? That can mean that you are going to be brilliant at being change superheroes. You're already engaged in change, and that's probably why you decided to join this webinar. However, what we need to remember is that we are going to have blind spots. And I say we because I'm someone who also likes change. We're going to have blind spots. So we're going to see the world in a different way from other people who may not like change so much. So Peter Senge has a great quote, which is, people don't resist change, they resist being changed. And a lot of the time, change initiatives, we talk about people being resistant to change, but I don't necessarily think they are. I just think they haven't heard it in a way that they want to hear it. The message is not communicated in the right way. And so much of change is about communication. So in terms of our rethinking change today, I'm going to think differently about change by just getting us to reflect on how we communicate change if we're here as change superheroes, change agents, which I'm thinking we might be. So effective communication may overcome resistance, and that's perhaps what we need to think about. And we'll talk as we go through about what effective communication could look like. Also, in terms of this, I'm thinking hybrid working, and tell me in the chat if you think this is right or wrong. Keep on chatting to me. I'm picking them up as I go along, and Elaine, I will respond to you on that. Thank you for that. Since we've moved more hybrid, I wonder if there's more of a communication vacuum. So that could be a good and a bad thing. So maybe there's less water cooler gossip about change, which could be correct and incorrect. But also maybe people don't feel so well communicated with, and if changes are going on, and they may keep their reactions to themselves. So I think there's definite differences in how we work. I'm interested whether you think that when you're managing change, is it harder to get people on board, to explain things to them? Everything has to be done more formally, potentially. Individual differences, i.e. personality, I believe affects how we hear and respond to change. And that's my theory that I wrote about some of that in the book, and I'm going to test out with you today in terms of looking at this. We here, I'm assuming because of almost all of us are indifferent to change or like change, are going to be flexible in our communication approach. And perhaps with some of the ideas I share with you during this webinar, we might be even more flexible. And the other thing that I was just reflecting on as I came across it, thinking about things like the Cotter model. So the Cotter model, and don't worry if you don't know what it is, I will cover at the end, is an 8-step model. But the thing about it is it's presented as linear. In my opinion, change is not linear. you have to cycle through it. It's almost have to cycle through it with different people, taking different people at different times. So as change agents or change superheroes, we have to be prepared to flex our communication to someone who's embracing the change, someone who is new to the change, who hasn't heard it. And we need to go, kind of view it as a spiral where we're always prepared to adapt our style according to the needs of that group of people, because it usually is people. Even though when you talk about change, and there's loads of you here from public sector here, a lot of the time people talk about change and think we're just thinking about systems change. So if we're rolling out SAP, or the gentleman that was over here doing a big NHS systems change, you're rolling something like that out, we think, oh, it's all about just rolling the systems out. That's going to make the change. It's so not. The change is when people start using it and we start eliciting the business benefits from whatever it was that we've put it in for. So this is these are the sort of angles I want to come in on and think about. So change superheroes. The book I wrote was called How to Be a Change Superhero. The first third of the book focuses in on us as change agents. I've done other webinars on this. You can listen to the podcast episodes on this. So I'm not going to go into it loads of detail, but these are the 5 C's that I feel are the C secrets of being a change superhero. We need to be courageous because we need to lead and we need to challenge people. We need to connect with strategy because we need to create a vision for people to follow. We need to provide corroboration to make things feel evidence-based, so there are reasons why people want to change. And also, we need to be excellent communicators and communicate in a language that other people understand, and we need to be great at collaboration. So this webinar is going to focus in on sort of niche aspects of communication and collaboration to give us a fresh insight on how we could work with people with change. I was playing around with I've not used animations for ages. So one of the models that I talk about in change, if you were formally communicating change, is this model called format. So the lady who wrote this, it's come out of my head and I haven't got it in my notes, but it doesn't matter. This, at the end of the day, this is a model that Bernice somebody anyway, she came up with this model of format in terms of just general communication. And what I like about it is if you are writing, let's say a formal communication, or you are setting up some slideshows, if you think about this, I know it seems really obvious. If you use this format, sort of why we're doing it, the need for the change, what the change is, how it's going to happen, and then thank you, yes, it is Bernice McCarthy, Michelle, what if we do, what if we don't? Then this is quite a useful format for you to use to structure a change. Why might that be? Well, one of the things, if you think again about different personality types, there are always different personality types who will ask you different questions if you don't give them the information up front. Certain people, if you feel like you're someone who needs to know why before you do things, some people are not motivated unless they can see a purpose for something that's got to happen. So we'll talk a little bit about motivation later. So the why needs to be a key aspect. And certainly if we think about connecting with business strategy, generally, if people understand that there is a real reason for change, then that why is really relevant. Sometimes change is a little bit too ephemeral. People don't even understand what it is. So you need to be able to explain the change in really simple language. So what it is, can we have an elevator pitch or a one sentence answer as to what that change is? And of course, people need to know how it's going to affect them. Okay, so much so obvious, but not necessarily common. What if we do, what if we don't? For me, this is interesting because this is where I think you tap into people's motivation. And there are schools of thoughts, people who've ever done anything on neuro-linguistic programming. I haven't done this for about 25 years, but people have often talked about towards and away motivation. And certainly, some people are really actively orientated towards goals, and others are more actively orientated away from pain. It can change on the situation. But it makes sense to me that if we are communicating both the exciting positive goal or carrot at the same time as moving away from a difficult business pain or unattractive future if we don't do anything, then what you're doing is you're motivating more people. It's appealing to more people. So there's something there about using this format model. I've done an entire podcast episode on this that we'll link onto if you want to explore that in more detail. And we've got things like handouts that you can use for it. So if you're planning to communicate something, format is not a bad way. You will get fewer questions and less confusion on things rather than just going ahead. Now I'm going to go into a little bit more of maybe the contentious stuff. Interestingly, I've got someone on this call, Michelle, who I've mentioned twice, who's a friend of mine in the village. So I don't always do personality, but I'm going to do personality on this one. So how many of you have come across Myers-Briggs? I'm sure you've come across Myers-Briggs personality indicator, and it has lovers and haters out there. So if we think about this, I'm not really fussed as to whether we love it or hate it, but let me know, do you know about it? And what I'm going to do for fun as a poll is get you to think about the individual differences. So where I'm coming from here is less about what your personality style is, but just using this as a metaphor for individual difference, because individual difference does make a difference as to how we communicate and how people receive our messages. So I'm just going to go to this next slide, which is very high level because I'm not here to do a Myers-Briggs session. And I'm going to pop up a poll for you to, let me just go back and get that up because this will take a few minutes to get your head around where we do this. So let me just launch this poll. So if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, this will be a doddle for you. You can whiz through it. If you're not, let me just simply look through the 4 dimensions of Myers-Briggs. Thinking about Myers-Briggs, it looks at 4 dimensions and essentially it says, where do you get your energy from is the first one. And you would have come across extroversion, so people get their energy from those outside of them, and introversion from those who are energized internally. In a moment, once we've gone through this, I'll tell you why I think this could be relevant for us when we're thinking about communicating to other people. So as you're going through there, you can think about whether you think you're more energized externally, you get energy from being with other people, or whether you recharge your batteries away from others, so you're more introverted. Honestly, it doesn't matter what you say in terms of this. I'm not going to pull them out. We'll just look out of curiosity. The next area is really about how we sort of prefer to live, how we see the world, how we take in information. So people who have a sensing preference, they like to start with the facts, the figures, the practicalities, and they build forward, generally almost in a sequential way. So someone with a sensing preference. Someone with an intuition preference, they start with the future, actually. They like that need to see the big picture before they can move forward. So they start in future and then move towards it. Thinking or feeling, this is generally in Myers-Briggs, it's about how you make decisions. And this would play into change in terms of how someone might consider change to be fair or not, because they have different views on what fair is. So someone who has a thinking preference is going to go down a facts-driven route. So they need to know logical facts about something. Whereas someone with a feeling preference makes a decision more on values, and values would be their values and actually how other people are being treated. So fairness for them is about how other people are being treated, whereas fairness on the other side is more facts and figures and would be seen to be quite logical. It's interesting, I did a webinar on diversity last week, and I wonder whether there would be a difference in equity versus equality definition on those 2 styles. I won't go there, that might be a bit complex. And then finally, judging and perceiving, it's kind of how you like to live your life. Do you like to get things signed, sealed, decisions made, closure, decide, move on? Or are you someone who likes flexibility and possibilities and how this might work? So hopefully everybody who wants to has had a chance to go for it. Just with my explanations there, I'll just give you 2-3 more seconds for a few more people. So we had 70% have managed to participate. Don't worry if it's new to you, and actually there's no right or wrong answers. It's just probably more interesting to you if you're thinking about it yourself. And the reason I think it's helpful to think about where you think you are is that we do all have preferences. And that means that the other style, which other people have, isn't necessarily going to be our preference. And that is going to have an impact on how we communicate. So I'm going to stop and share the results there. We've got 75%. Thank you for that. Let's have a look what we have here. So, oh, that's interesting. I could have had a hypothesis about change agents being more intuition, but it doesn't come through on this one necessarily. So we have quite an even split, probably in line with sort of audience, maybe in terms of our overall population. So slightly more introversion. Again, it'd be fascinating actually whether that means that you're more inclined to come onto a webinar, because in terms of that you're happy to listen. We have got more sensing, which would be in line with the population. It's generally a 60-40 sensing intuition. Slightly more thinking, feeling, and then slightly more perceiving, flexible, and judging, planned. So you know what you put there. So that just gives us an indication. So why am I getting us to think about this? This is because we are rethinking how we might deal with change. And with our own self-awareness in line with Myers-Briggs, we could think about what that impact might have on others. So the majority of people on this call chose introvert. So this would suggest that if you were having some change communicated to you, you might want some time to reflect on it. You might even withdraw, have questions later, and prefer small group or one-on-one discussion. And I think the thing with that is that your preference is great, but if you are communicating to extroverts, then being aware that they might have questions right there, right then. They might want to talk about it, they want to question it, they want to talk it through. They will express their emotions potentially, and that's all part of them processing it. So it's going to feel more in your face, I suppose, if you're an introvert. So being able to accommodate that. Flip side of it, if you are more extrovert preference, you want to just talk it all through now and done and dusted and be off with you. You need to give those people with an introverted preference, again, it's roughly 50-50 in society, time to go away and think and come back with their questions, or even have information up front they can think about so they can have questions there and then. Of course, these preferences, it doesn't just apply to change. I'm just applying this to change. So that's a first difference. If you're communicating a change, the response, someone might go into themselves and be really quiet. You're an extrovert, think, oh God, that's so terrible, they went so quiet, that's a dreadful sign. It might not be, they're just reflecting about it, they come back, they're totally fine. But being aware that whatever your preference isn't, someone else might demonstrate, and being flexible. So it just being alert to those differences between us. So then if we think about sensing and intuition, are you practical and organised or more drawn to patterns? Now, more people on this call are sensing preference or chose down the facts and details, and fewer were intuition. I had a theory, although people who, I'd be interested to know if you were someone who said you really like change, whether you have an intuition preference. That's completely my pop psychology. I have no evidence for that other than theory, but that's my preference, and I kind of feel that there's a slight link there. In terms of sensing, so if you are if you are someone with an intuition preference, there's a fewer of us on here at the moment, you might be all positive about that change because you can see the possibilities. You're actually excited by future vision. You're not excited by things being the same. So and you don't really need the detail. So a vague idea of where it's going sounds all right to me, job done, off you go. Those people with a sensing preference, they really need the facts and details. So if you're someone with intuition preference, communicating to others, sensing, you need to stop and think, what are the questions they're going to ask? This is the how of the format. So facts and details, practical, straightforward language. What does this mean in practice? These would be the questions that people will ask. They want real examples, and they want you to have thought it through. So be careful if you've got an intuition preference. You might be all excited about the possibilities, slightly vague about the detail, and that is going to not go down well with people with sensing preference, and it's going to feel like resistance when we talk about the change curve. On the flip side of it, if you are someone with a sensing preference and you're communicating to others, well, the great thing is that you are likely to think about those details, have that practical, straightforward language. Don't forget to inspire some of the exciting stuff. But the reality is, talking to other intuition people, as long as they are your opposites, they're probably going to be reasonably positive, as long as you can remember to share that vision, that link there with the future. Then we've got our decision making. So Myers-Briggs type indicators, strictly speaking, this level is really about how you make decisions. Now, I can think about examples here where people have gone through really tricky change. Let's say there's a redundancy program going on. Someone with a thinking preference, as long as they understand the logical rationale for a change, even if it meant that they were being made redundant, but they could see that there were very fair criteria, it was entirely logical, then they actually go, okay, that's fair enough, that makes sense to me. They're going to be more likely to be on board with it, as long as there are clear, transparent, logical facts. So we need to be prepared to communicate those, and we need to make sure that those are in place, particularly with difficult change. Interestingly, the flip side, I've also seen this in reality, is people with a feeling preference, even if they are not being made redundant in this example, they can have a hugely emotional response to the change because they are worried about their neighbours or other people in the team. And of course, that's very difficult. If you're in HR, which often lots of people I've got on this call are in HR, that's really tricky because you can't say they're fine or not. You've got to be careful what you say, but you need to be able to reassure those people who might be having an emotional reaction. And you're thinking, I don't know why they're so emotional, because they're fine. They're thinking of others, they're thinking outside of it. And equally, if you are a feeling professional about to deliver that difficult message, you're possibly going to feel really awkward about it and feeling more emotions than you need to. But remember that quite a lot of the people with a thinking preference are going to be more comfortable than you realise. So these are, again, different types of which people might respond to change, and just being aware to our natural blind spots where some are and some are not engaged with it. And then finally, judging versus perceiving. So this is how we like to live our life. People who have a judging preference, as long as they, well, again, what they want to know is, when's it going to happen? You need the detail. So a sensing, judging preference, someone with a sensing, thinking, judging preference is actually probably going to be fairly cool with your change, even if it's not pleasant, as long as you've got the facts and figures, you've got logical rationale, and you say, when is it going to happen? What they don't like is indecision, vagueness, and actually if they get closure, then they can move forwards on it. Interestingly, people with perceiving preference, a lot of people on here, and we had quite a lot of you guys in this particular non-descriptive group of population, if you like, really like flexibility and possibilities. So that's going to be something where you're probably going to be really comfortable with change. You're quite flexible. You can deal with ambiguity, which is great. The key to remember is that others may not be so comfortable with that ambiguity. So thinking about when you communicate things and being prepared to just give clarity, tell people what you can tell them, give clarity about things that you can give them clarity about. Again, don't like it too ambiguous. So if you've got an intuition perceiving preference, you're going to have someone who's very comfortable with ambiguity and change, for maybe even change for change's sake in terms of those things. So that's kind of enough for Myers-Briggs. You'll have this to refer back to, but I was getting you to think about this. We all have our preferences, and if we're talking about change, suddenly this is another factor. People are so different, and this is only one way in which people are different. If you think about individual differences that could have an impact on whether or not they appear to be resistant to any change that you're driving. And we have to think, okay, am I communicating it in a way that is appealing to all of those Myers-Briggs type indicators? On top of that, we're trying to persuade people to change. So thinking about the change equation, I've already alluded to the carrot and stick, because we talked about that in our format model about why, what, how, what if we do, what if we don't. So this is the what if we do, what if we don't. Now, this also is reinforced by the change equation, which people come up with here. So this model here is, if you want to have satisfactory change or successful change, we've got to think about the balance or the weight of the argument that we put in place, where people need to feel sufficiently dissatisfied with the status quo. They also need to see an attractive future. So this again is the sort of the future vision. A factor that's going to come in is how easy or difficult is that change? Is it something they consider is going to be really difficult or hard or impactful for them? And of course, the cost, personal and financial. So it will come down to them personally. So these are, again, if you're working on someone on an individual basis, it's useful for us thinking about this in a sort of a personal way. But when we're communicating this, having this link between, okay, this current now, that's me need to move away the stick from the current status quo. We need to be able to communicate a really inspiring, attractive future that's going to, it's going to appeal to the intuition people, but it's also going to feel quite logical. And they think about how easy is it to make change. So those sensing, practical people want to know step by step how easy it's going to be to do, and no one wants it to cost too much, or if it costs, then we need to know it's worth it, in terms of whether it's human values or whether it's personal values. So there's all of these things, and you could pluck any of these. use any of them, is going to enrich your approach to managing change. If you're just trying to think, how do I take people with me? Have I done that? Have I created dissatisfaction with the status quo? Have I made the future attractive? Have I made the change seem easy to achieve? And have I minimized the personal and financial cost? So that's another aspect of change that we can just factor in as we're planning, as we're communicating with others. But nevertheless, even though we might have thought of all these things, you will still get people, it feels like they're being resistant. So if I've got persistent resistance to change, have we considered the change equation? So I've just talked about that. Sufficient carrots, sufficient motivation. Is it motivation in language or terms that actually they hear? And is it kind of sufficiently negative, moving away from something? Do they understand that if we don't do anything, or what's coming down the line, that actually the pain is going to come either way? The other thing I thought I'll just touch on, because again, I've experienced it. You probably know there are people out there who there's the way they might communicate. Some people really look for differences, and I find with change that people can get particularly focused on what's different. It feels like, let's say you've got an office move, and people go, oh my God, that's going to be a different bus journey. It's going to be a different office. It's going to change my commute. They become really fixated on everything that's different, even though someone else who's more comfortable with it might consider it quite a small change. In that situation, and this is quite important because I think people who are often change agents are often quite attracted to difference. Maybe they get easily bored and so they seek out difference, but that can be very threatening to people who don't like it so much. And I think this also links into neurodiversity, where people any kind of difference, it gives them a discomfort, a disproportionate discomfort, which can come over like resistance to change. What we need to do there is provide reassurance and remind people about what's the same. So if you're wondering why the green dogs are on there, one dog's bigger than the other and one's got a red collar on, but actually they're both green dogs. They're both animals with 4 legs. They both bark. They both belong to the same owner. There's lots of things you can reinforce the sameness. So in terms of the office move, absolutely moving office. However, I'm still going to have the same team. I'm going to have the same manager. I'm going to have the same job description. I'm going to have the same objectives. I'm going to have the same uniform or whatever it might be. There's lots of things that remain the same, and that can be a great way to help people calm down in terms of overcoming resistance, focusing on reinforcing sameness when people feel threatened by the difference, and being alert to the fact that some people really like difference. And then equally, you will often hear generalizations, and I noticed earlier I was looking at the people saying, if you hear the chat on hybrids and stuff like that, deletion, distortion, and generalizations. We do this. It's a natural way in which our brains can work. We tend to generalize things. It's easier to take things on. So a deletion is where we might kind of tune out or turn something off. So we won't hear anything of the positive message. We'll just see the negative. We won't hear any of the sameness about the change. We just hear the things that are different. Distortion is where you've got people who've got a personal prejudice that sort of distorts a message. And the generalization, kids are good at this. So everybody says this, we all do that. They take 1 or 2 experiences out of context. And if you hear this kind of raging generalization, that often kind of creates a kind of group think of generalization and pain. And what we need to do there is go, okay, so who exactly? And just try and pin things down to specifics. In terms of a deletion, if they've deleted a key message, just want to check you actually heard the fact that 5 things are going to be the same, 1 thing's going to be different. So this, and this. Distortion, we have to challenge those things. So listening out for those sort of these human traits that happen. And people who do them, they don't do it intentionally, I don't think. They don't do it intentionally, but it can be quite challenging to deal with. And being really patient, if you're in your change superhero mode, to just patiently pick up on those deletions or distortions and get specific. If someone's overgeneralizing, patiently bring them back down to a specific. Now, you have to be a bit of a broken record there because they still won't necessarily change, but it's important to do that because people who communicate like that, they can sort of spread that negativity or those generalizations. I mean, it's kind of social media. I don't know why my brain's just gone to the Kate Middleton conspiracy thing, but it's kind of one person distorting something it gets blown out of proportion, and you have to try and be the voice of reason and try and calm these things down. So those are my handling persistent resistance to change. We talked a bit about personality. One more personality bit. It's a bit of a mixed bag today, isn't it? Like I said, I've done lots on this before we just go on to Cotter and then briefly wrap up. So the other thing that I think is worth thinking about, this is when we're looking at building our change league, our cohort of people. You can't do change on your own. You need to take people with you. You can't lead it all on your own. You need to have others to do it. If anyone's ever done Belbin team roles, then that identifies that most of us have got 2 or 3 team roles that we are better or worse at. Now, to my view, those fit at different stages in a change program. So if you are brilliant at coordinating, if you are a great resource investigator, which means you're great at finding resources, at starting things, you're usually great at starting and not so good at finishing, or you're a great shaper, so you're a decision maker, you kind of leadership, and you're really useful at the start of the change. I'm not saying you're not useful later, but you have particular skills that are useful at the start of a change. In the middle of the change, certain styles of person, resource investigator, shapers to a certain extent, get a bit bored. And this is where people who are implementers, who are just grafters, or team workers, and you can look these all up. Again, we've got infographics with summaries on these, and we'll make them available to you. If you've got that kind of preference, then actually those are the people that keep the morale up and they keep the work doing, because change, like I said, it spirals. It's not A to B, it spirals, and you have to keep on working at it and not get too exhausted. And then towards the end, you need people with skills like monitor evaluator to make sure things are being done well. To a certain extent, you need monitor evaluator early to make sure things are planned well. And so on, completer finisher skills. Now, that is a raging generalization, having just said don't generalize, but it's quite a simplistic fit. But what I suppose I'm talking about here is, if you are involved in change, think about who's on your change league and think not just about their project skills, i.e. their technical skills, but also their personality skills, what they bring to the party there. And also, if it's a long project, I'm thinking, things like SAP rollouts, people do lose the will to live. So think about refreshing your project team with people with the right skills at the right time. And using something like this, just stepping back from, why do I want that person, can be a really useful way of doing it. So Cotter's change model, I've come across this numerous times before, and I've discussed this in more detail, and I think it is really, really powerful. This basically talks about unfreezing an organisation. This is best applied to large-scale organisational change, and there's various things you need to do. So you need to establish a sense of urgency, form a powerful guiding coalition, and I'm going to come back to these in a moment, just in terms of this angle on rethinking organisational change, and create a vision. Now, that stage between purple and orange, in my experience, is where often change starts to break down, because it's this point there's a vision done in the ivory tower and then it's communicated. Now, is it communicated using the format? Is it communicated in a way that allows all the different personality types to hear it in a way that's comfortable to them? Well, that depends, and that is going to depend on how well it's taken on board or not. We then apply the change, remove obstacles, create short-term wins. And this is where, between the orange and blue, in my experience, again, quite often we find that change falls down, because we think that actually we've communicated the change, you've had a bit of a short-term win, maybe things have been rolled out, everyone goes home. But actually it's not been embedded, it's not been consolidated. And this is where the spiraling goes on, because you might have rolled it out to one part of the organisation, job done, project team starting to disband, everyone's off, but it still needs to be used. There's still the laggards or new people coming to the organisation that haven't got the message. And if you're not careful, the weight of people who haven't moved on with the change starts to pull you back. So you need to keep pushing forwards. And for me, this is where you would refresh with a change team. So those are the sort of things to think about. And I'm going to look at this in a high level, because it's a model that I've discussed a number of times before. I'm just going to skip this slide. What I would suggest here, if you're thinking of this and rethinking it as an HR change agent here, is make sure you think at different stages in the project what to apply on this. So you might want to think about why change at the start. So that why, remember this, why, what, how, that creates a sense of urgency. Form a powerful guiding coalition. So I've talked about this include the right people. And the right people is more than just their role. It's about their personality and their preferences and what they can bring to it. Make sure the vision is compelling, it's communicated powerfully in language that's going to appeal to all types of individual differences. Think of things like the change equation, so people can clearly see the future and moving away from a negative. Communicate it in a variety of approaches, in a variety of languages. We've covered in lots and lots of ways. And then keep momentum and bring in people. Sorry, I'm looking at my folder here. Bring in people who are the right skills at the right time to help you drive that change through. Don't let it spiral backwards. Help it to spiral forwards. So bring in fresh blood with the right skills who can help drive it forwards. So for me, this is thinking about it less as a process, but more about the people and the communication style that you need that's going to make that process successful. Cotter says you can't over communicate change. I think that is true. I once heard that he said that you need to communicate change 10 times more than you think you should. I think that's also potentially true. However, if you say the same message in the same way 10 times, it's still probably not going to get through. So for me, I think you need to communicate it 10 times, but you need to think about varying that style. Have you communicated it in a way that's going to appeal to someone who has a sensing preference or a perceiving preference or an intuition preference? Have you communicated it to the people who seek out difference? So have we thought about all these different ways and tapped into people as to why they may or may not be hearing that message? So it's not enough just to repeat it. We've got to communicate it in a variety of ways through a variety of media, but with a variety of styles of communication that's going to appeal to others and take them through it. So in summary, the things that I've covered here is that format model. So if you're communicating change, why, what, how, what if? So remembering our carrot and stick. Think about personality differences that may change in terms of our receptiveness to change. There are language differences in the way that we are going to hear a change message, and much of change breaks down due to miscommunication. So language is going to be part of it. Maybe change is a spiral, so we need to be prepared to keep looping back to take people with us, to adapt in terms of things, and be prepared to flex styles and people to get the best result if you're involved in change. So that was what I wanted to cover with you today. Do please feel free to drop any questions or comments in the chat. I'm just going to put up, we'll send these out to you. This is what's coming up over the next 3 months. So we've got more rethinking of our organisational development series, more of our rethinking series, so OD, that's 23rd of April. And then we're going into high performance series, taking us into the summer. If you want to know more about 360 Now, we've got an open demo of 360 Now again, which that's later on this month. So that's actually just next week. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to sign up. And there's links to make it really easy to you if you just want to sign up from within the chat. And all of these infographics, etc., we'll send these out to you so you can easily access them. So I'll say, hopefully it was a little bit different. It was rethinking. If you want more of the basics or the essentials, there's links to previous webinars I've done where I've gone into things like Cotter in lots of detail. I've gone into the change superhero traits in lots of detail. And actually the book, or if you like to listen to audio, but you can also access it. And I go through all of this in more information in my How to Be a Change Superhero book, which is also available. Oh, thank you, Joel. Very pleased to hear it. Hopefully you're in Wales. It's on Kindle and it's on hard copy and it's also on Audible. Lovely to meet you. Ah, yes, and Laura's just dropped those of you still here, the superhero toolkit. A load of resources are in there. So about 15 or 16 free resources that are linked to the book. So help yourselves to that. Okay, I don't think I'm seeing any questions coming up. So I'd just like to thank you very much for joining. And I'm going to close the webinar and stop the recording now.